We've got something really exciting lined up for today, and I just can't wait to get into it. You know how we talk about bringing the past into the present on the Classic Connection? Well, today we're going to look at something that's iconic in British motoring.
That's right! We're talking about the Morris Minor. This is just perfect because I've been doing some research on these lately.
And that's why I brought it up today, Barry, because you're great when it comes to classic cars.
Thanks! This is such an interesting topic. People are always asking whether these old classics can work in today's world. And the Morris Minor, it's such a perfect example to look into.
That's exactly what we're going to explore today. How practical is it to use a Morris Minor as your everyday car in 2025?
We're talking about a car that's had a dramatic effect on shaping British motoring history, and its relevance today is quite surprising.
So Barry, tell me about where this incredible little car actually came from. What's the story behind it?
Well, the Morris Minor, its origin story that goes back to 1948. And what's really interesting is that it was actually designed by a genius called Alec Issigonis, the same guy who later went on to design the Mini.
I love that connection. Both cars became icons in their own right.
Yes, and what's really incredible is that Issigonis always wanted to create what he called a maximum car in minimum space. And that was unusual at the time.
So what made it so different from other cars of that era?
When it first came out, it was just completely different from anything else on the road. We're talking about a time when most British cars were these big, bulky things, and most still had a separate chassis. But the Minor had incredible unitary construction and a wider track than other cars, which meant it actually handled well.
What was the public's reaction when it first came out?
Initially, some people were actually kind of shocked because it looked so different from traditional cars, but it very quickly became this massive hit. They ended up making over 1.3 million of them, and they were everywhere in Britain.
That's incredible. And did it change things for the British car industry?
It helped to completely revolutionize British motoring. It was basically the first British car that really brought modern features to the average family. And what's really significant is that it showed you could have a car that was both practical and actually fun to drive. It set the template for so many British cars that came after it.
So, what's actually under the bonnet of these little cars? What can modern drivers expect in terms of performance?
The Morris Minor, it went through several engine iterations. Originally a 918cc side valve engine, though after the merger of Morris and Austin, the Austin 803cc overhead valve engine, which was upgraded to a 948cc and then a 1098cc, which is probably the most common one you'll find in the UK from the later model cars. The 1098cc produces about 48 horsepower, which, by today's standards, might not sound like much.
That does sound pretty modest.
The thing is, though, the Minor was never about raw power at all. You're looking at a top speed of around 75 miles per hour, and it'll do 0 to 60 in, well, eventually. What's important to understand, though, is that these cars were designed for a completely different kind of driving experience.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, the Minor is all about the connection with the road. The steering, it's completely mechanical, there's no power assistance at all, and that means you can really feel everything that's happening. The gearbox, it's a 4-speed manual, and it's quite smooth once you get used to it.
And how reliable are they in day-to-day use?
That's one of the best things about them. The Morris Minor is incredibly mechanically simple. What that means is there's so much less that can go wrong compared to modern cars. The engine, it's basically bulletproof if you maintain it properly.
What about modern traffic conditions? Can it keep up?
It does surprisingly well. I mean, yes, you have to plan your acceleration and braking a bit more carefully, and motorway driving can be an issue with the earlier cars. It requires a bit more attention and, to be honest, is probably best avoided. But in city traffic, it's absolutely fine. The thing to remember is that the brakes, they're drums all around on most models, so you need to leave more stopping distance than in a modern car.
Are there any particular quirks that new owners should know about?
No, not really. There's a manual choke, and in most cars, a wooden peg to go with that choke, unheard of today, and you do need to learn how to use them properly. And the electrics are obviously from a different era entirely, but that's part of the charm, right? And once you get used to your car's little quirks, they just become second nature.
So, let's talk about what it's like to live with one of these as a daily driver, comfort-wise and all.
Well, the comfort level, it's quite good really, obviously not up to modern standards, but you wouldn't expect that. The seats, they're well designed, and even though they're simple, they support you quite well. And the suspension, while it's basic by modern standards, it gives a nice, smooth ride.
What about space? They look pretty small from the outside.
That's one of the surprising things about the Minor. The interior space is quite impressive for such a small car. You see, Sir Alec Issigonis designed it with this concept of packaging efficiency. And what that means is that the space inside is used really well, really cleverly.
But what about modern safety standards? That's got to be a concern, right?
Well, you're absolutely right to bring that up. The safety features are obviously very basic compared to modern cars. There's no airbags, no ABS, and the body structure isn't designed to crumple like modern cars. Though what's interesting is that the all-round visibility in the later 1000 models is almost better than many modern cars.
How does it handle things like parking and city driving?
Oh, that's where the Miner really shines. The size is just perfect for city use. The turning circle is reasonably tight, and because the car is so compact, you can squeeze into parking spaces that modern cars couldn't dream of fitting into. Plus, the thin pillars mean you've got that amazing visibility all round.
And what about fuel efficiency? That is really important these days.
Well, you can expect around 35 to 40 miles per gallon, which isn't bad at all, especially for a classic car. And because the engine is so simple, you can really maximize the efficiency with proper maintenance and careful driving.
What about things like heating and ventilation in different weather conditions?
That's where you notice you're in a classic car. The heater, it works, but it's not exactly what you'd call powerful. And air conditioning, well, that's what the windows are for. You know what though? There's something special about opening all the windows on a summer's day and being able to feel the connection with the environment around you. In the rain though, the wipers, especially on the earlier cars, can be a bit, shall we say, leisurely.
So, what about keeping one of these running? How hard is it to maintain a Morris Minor these days?
That's one of the best things about the Miner. The mechanicals are incredibly simple. Parts availability is excellent. There's a network of specialists and suppliers who are keeping these cars going.
Really? So you can still get everything you need?
Definitely. It's amazing because you can buy almost every single part for a Morris Minor brand new. And what's even better is that because the engineering is so straightforward, most maintenance jobs are quite manageable for a home mechanic.
What kind of regular maintenance are we talking about?
Well, you're looking at basic stuff like oil changes every 3,000 miles or so and regular greasing points that need attention. The points and plugs need checking unless the car has been upgraded to electronic ignition, and you'll want to keep an eye on things like brake adjustment. The beauty is that everything's so accessible. There's no computers, no complex electronics to worry about.
So upgrading them for modern use, is that something people do?
Oh yes, that's become really popular. There are so many modifications you can do to make a Miner more suitable for modern roads. People are fitting disc brakes, updating the suspension, and upgrading the electrics. Some owners even fit more powerful engines from other classics.
Are these modifications expensive to do?
The costs are usually quite reasonable, especially when you consider what you're getting. A disc brake conversion might set you back around $500, though it makes such a difference to the driving experience. And then there are these fantastic electronic ignition systems that assist in transforming reliability.
What about more modern conveniences? Can you add those?
You absolutely can. People are fitting everything from modern stereo systems to USB charging ports, and even air conditioning can be installed now. The key is doing these upgrades sympathetically. You want to keep the character of the car while making it more usable for everyday life.
So, tell me about actually living with a Morris Minor today. How does it fit into modern life?
Oh, that's actually one of my favorite topics because these cars, they fit into modern life in such surprising ways. First off, they're perfect for city driving. The size is so manageable.
In what way does that help?
Well, modern cities are getting more and more crowded, right? And the Miner is smaller than most modern cars, so parking is just a breeze. And you get this amazing visibility because of the tall windows and thin pillars. It makes navigating tight spaces so much easier.
What about longer journeys, like weekend trips?
That's another thing that really surprises people. The Miner is really quite comfortable for longer drives. The seats they're surprisingly supportive, and the car cruises along quite happily at 50-55 mph.
So I'd imagine there's a social aspect to owning one?
Definitely! The classic car community is incredible. You've got these amazing owners clubs, and there are meets and rallies practically every weekend during the summer. The best part is that Miner owners are such a friendly bunch, always ready to help each other out with advice and spare parts.
What about using it as a daily commuter?
Well, that's totally doable, especially for shorter commutes. More and more people are choosing classics like the Miner for their daily drives. It's kind of become this wonderful alternative to modern transport. With cities more congested, keeping up with the traffic flow is certainly not an issue. Occasionally you'll come across special classic car parking spaces because some companies appreciate how these cars add character to the workplace.
Really? I had no idea classics were making such a comeback.
Oh yes, it's part of this whole movement towards more mindful, conscious consumption. People are really starting to appreciate these simpler, more characterful cars, and the Miner just fits perfectly into that lifestyle. It's sustainable, it's repairable, and it just brings so much joy to everyday journeys.
Okay, let's talk about something really important, the costs. What should people expect to pay for a Morris Minor these days?
Well, that's hard to define because the market is just so varied right now. You can find projects for, and I mean real projects, for around £1,000. For a nice daily drivable example, you're looking at somewhere between £3,000 and £10,000. And of course, that depends on the model and condition of the car. It is worth remembering convertibles and travelers will be worth more.
And what about the running costs?
These cars are actually quite economical to run. Parts are still relatively cheap because there's such a huge support network. You can get pretty much every part you need new. You could actually almost build a whole new car from the parts available, and they're not crazy expensive. Fuel economy is actually quite decent too. You're looking at around 35 miles per gallon.
What about insurance and maintenance costs?
That's where it gets really interesting. Insurance is typically quite reasonable because these cars are just so simple and relatively slow. And maintenance, well, if you're handy with tools, you can do so much yourself. The engine bay is just so accessible, and everything's really straightforward to work on.
Do they hold their value well?
The market for classics is relatively stable right now. These cars have been holding their own for years, and the good thing is that they seem to be reasonably resistant to market downturns. People just love them.
Are there any hidden costs people should know about?
The main thing to watch out for is rust repair. That's probably the biggest potential expense. If you buy a solid car, keep it dry and stay on top of maintenance, the running costs are actually quite predictable.
So after everything we've discussed today, what's your final verdict on using a Morris Minor as a daily driver in today's world?
Well, I really think it comes down to what you're looking for in a car. If you want modern conveniences and top-notch performance, then obviously this isn't going to be your cup of tea. But if you're after character and something that's truly special, the Morris Minor could be a brilliant choice.
What type of person do you think would be the best fit for one?
Someone who really appreciates the simpler things in life, and someone who's patient. Because you've got to remember, these cars, they take a bit more planning, a bit more maintenance, but for the right person, it's just such a rewarding experience. And the community around these cars is just incredible.
What would be your top piece of advice for someone considering taking the plunge?
The absolute key thing is to buy the best example you can afford. Don't try to save money by buying a project unless you're really prepared for that. And making sure you've got a good relationship with a good mechanic wouldn't hurt. Someone who knows how to work on old cars, or at least who knows what a carburetor is.
Thanks so much for sharing all this amazing insight about the Morris Minor with us today on the Classic Connection. It's been fascinating.
It's been a real pleasure, and I just hope this helps people see that these wonderful cars can still have a place in our modern world. They're not just museum pieces, they're great classics that can bring so much joy to everyday life. Thanks for listening, everyone. Join us again soon.